The note trembled in Kieran's hands. His fingers, still damp from wiping down tables, left faint smudges on the expensive cream-colored paper. Around him, Café Voluto buzzed with the comfortable din of Walnut Creek's elite, the clink of wine glasses, the hum of deal-making, the artificial laughter that always sounded the same. But Kieran heard none of it. His entire world had collapsed into the handwritten words before him. I know this feels like a terrible way to introduce myself. I see you, Kieran Blackwood. He looked up sharply, scanning the restaurant. The woman in the red power suit was gone. Her table sat empty except for the bill, paid in full, tip line slashed with a brutal 0. That 0 had felt like a punch when he first saw it, confirmation of every fear that whispered in his head during sleepless nights. But this note changed everything. His eyes darted back to the paper, reading faster now, his heart hammering against his ribs. I see the struggle, the exhaustion, and the sacrifice you're making for your daughter. You are more than what you seem to be. I've been watching you for a while. How did this stranger know about Ava? The words should have felt threatening, but instead they carried something else. Recognition, the one thing Kieran hadn't felt in the 3 years since Emily died. There's more to your story than just this. If you want a chance to change everything, come see me tomorrow, my office. I'm offering you a job. An opportunity to leave this all behind. The signature at the bottom made his breath catch. Cassia Dumont. Everyone in Silicon Valley knew that name. Tech innovation, billion-dollar valuations, Forbes covers. But why him? Why a washed-up tech developer turned waiter? He folded the note carefully, his movements deliberate despite his racing pulse. It went into his apron pocket, pressed against his heart. Around him, the dinner rush continued. Oblivious, normal, unchanged. But Kieran Blackwood's world had just shattered and reformed into something he didn't recognize. And the most terrifying part? He was already planning to show up at Dumont Enterprises tomorrow morning, even though he had no idea what this billionaire really wanted from him. Would you trust a mysterious offer from a stranger who left you nothing but saw everything? Kieran stood outside Dumont Enterprises at 7:45 in the morning, 15 minutes early because desperation had stolen his ability to sleep. The building rose 30 stories into the California sky, all glass and steel and impossible dreams. His reflection stared back at him from the gleaming entrance. Wrinkled khakis, a shirt he'd ironed 3 times, shoes he'd polished until his arm ached. He looked exactly like what he was, a man pretending to belong in a world that had forgotten him. The lobby swallowed him whole. Marble floors reflected recessed lighting that cost more than his annual rent. A fountain in the center burbled with water that probably cost more per gallon than the coffee he couldn't afford at the cafe. Men and women in tailored suits moved with purpose, their footsteps confident, their postures screaming success. Kieran felt his shoulders hunch instinctively, making himself smaller, trying to disappear into the edges of the space where people like him belonged. Can I help you? The receptionist's smile was professional and distant. Her eyes assessed him in 2 seconds. The frayed collar, the outdated tie, the desperation he couldn't quite hide. She'd already categorized him. Wrong floor, wrong building, wrong life. But Kieran pulled out the note, now creased from being read 50 times last night, and slid it across her pristine desk. Her expression shifted. The smile became real, her posture straightening with sudden attention. Mr. Blackwood, Miss Dumont is expecting you. She gestured toward the elevators with a manicured hand. 30th floor. She said to send you straight up. The words felt surreal, like dialogue from someone else's life. Kieran nodded, his throat too tight for speech, and walked toward the elevators, feeling every eye in the lobby tracking his movement. The elevator doors closed, sealing him into a glass box that began its ascent. Walnut Creek spread below him, the life he knew shrinking with each floor. At 15 stories, he could still see Café Voluto, where he'd served his last table 5 hours ago before calling in sick for his morning shift. At 20 stories, he could see Ava's elementary school, where she sat in class right now, unaware her father was gambling their entire future on a note from a stranger. At 30 stories, the doors opened, and Kieran Blackwood stepped into a world that would either save him or destroy everything he'd fought to protect. How far would you go to escape a life that's drowning you? Cassia Dumont stood with her back to the door, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked an empire. She didn't turn when Kieran entered, didn't acknowledge the sound of his cheap shoes on her imported rug. The silence stretched, calculated and heavy, until Kieran's palms began to sweat. Then she pivoted, and the woman from the restaurant, cold, distant, untouchable, fixed him with eyes that cut straight through every defense he'd built. "You came." 2 words, but they carried weight, not surprise. Satisfaction. She gestured to a chair that probably cost more than his car. "Sit, Kieran. We have a lot to discuss, and I don't waste time on pleasantries." He sat because his legs had stopped working properly. Up close, Cassia Dumont was more than beautiful. She was a force of nature contained in human form, all sharp edges and controlled power. Her red suit from last night had been replaced by charcoal gray, but the effect was the same: intimidation wrapped in elegance. "I didn't offer you this opportunity out of pity," she continued, circling her desk like a predator assessing prey. "I see potential others miss because they're too busy judging surfaces. You were a developer at Nexus Tech 6 years ago. Good work, innovative thinking, until your wife got sick and you walked away." Kieran's chest constricted. How did she know about Emily, about Nexus? "You sacrificed ambition for love. Most people think that makes you weak. I think it makes you exactly what I need." Her fingers drummed once on the mahogany desk. "I'm building something that requires absolute loyalty. Someone who understands sacrifice. Someone who has nothing to lose and everything to prove." She leaned forward, her gaze pinning him to the chair. "I need an executive assistant who can handle the pressure that's destroyed 5 people before you. The hours will be brutal. The expectations impossible. My competitors will try to break you. My board will question me, but if you survive, if you prove me right, you'll have a salary that changes your daughter's life and a career path back into tech." Cassia slid a folder across the desk. Inside, a contract with numbers that made Kieran's vision blur. Starting salary $180,000. Benefits, stock options, a signing bonus that would clear every debt he carried. "You start Monday, 7 a.m. But understand this, Kieran. I'm not offering you a job, I'm offering you a test. And failure means you lose everything, including the dignity you walked in here with." She extended her hand, and Kieran saw the trap and the salvation in equal measure, both waiting for him to choose. What would you sacrifice for a chance to stop drowning? Monday morning hit Kieran like a freight train wrapped in spreadsheets and acronyms he'd forgotten existed. Cassia's previous assistant had left behind a desk drowning in chaos. 17 unread emails marked urgent, a calendar packed with meetings scheduled in 15-minute increments, and a post-it note that read, "Good luck, you'll need it stuck to the computer monitor." The office hummed with an energy that felt like standing too close to high-voltage wires, everyone moving at twice normal speed, speaking in a language of efficiency that had no room for confusion or hesitation. "You're the new assistant?" A woman in her 30s paused at his desk, her expression mixing curiosity and pity. "I'm Rachel, head of product development. Quick tip. Kasia takes her coffee at 8:15, 10:30, and 2. Black, no sugar, exactly 170 degrees. She'll never say she wants it, but if it's not there, you'll feel her disappointment like frostbite." Rachel leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Also, never schedule meetings back to back. She needs 7 minutes between each one to reset. And whatever you do, don't let Gregory Holden corner you alone. He's already destroyed 2 of Cassia's assistants." The name sent a chill through Kieran's chest. Gregory Holden, Cassia's business partner, the man whose corner office sat across from hers like a rival kingdom. Kieran had Googled him over the weekend. Yale-educated, ruthlessly ambitious, known for crushing anyone he perceived as weak. The articles called him brilliant. The employee reviews on Glassdoor called him something else entirely. But before Kieran could ask Rachel more, his phone buzzed with a message from Cassia. "Conference room B, 2 minutes. Bring the Fujimoto file." Panic flooded his system. What Fujimoto file? He yanked open drawers, fingers fumbling through folders with labels that meant nothing. 30 seconds left. His heart hammered against his ribs. Then he saw it. A red folder marked Fujimoto Tech Acquisition, buried under 3 others. He grabbed it and ran. his shoes squeaking on polished floors, arriving at the conference room with 5 seconds to spare, breathless and sweating through his new shirt. Cassia sat at the head of a table surrounded by 8 executives, her expression unreadable as Kieran stumbled through the door. Every eye turned to assess him, the new assistant, the charity case, the man who didn't belong. But Cassia simply extended her hand for the file, opened it without looking at him, and continued her presentation as if he were furniture. And Kieran realized with sickening clarity that this was his life now, perpetually drowning, perpetually one mistake from disaster, perpetually wondering if the woman who'd saved him was slowly destroying him instead. How long can you pretend to be someone you're not before you forget who you were? 3 weeks in, Kieran started to understand the pattern. Cassia Dumont operated on 3 hours of sleep and expected the same from everyone in her orbit. She communicated in glances and silences, more than words, a private language Kieran was learning to speak through trial and painful error. Late nights became normal, the office emptying until only their 2 desks glowed in the darkness, the city lights of Walnut Creek spreading below them like fallen stars. And somewhere in those quiet hours something shifted between them that neither acknowledged but both felt pulling them into dangerous territory. "You're getting better at anticipating," Cassia said, one Thursday night at 9:15, not looking up from her laptop. "The Matsuda presentation materials were exactly what I needed before I knew I needed them." It was the closest thing to praise she'd given him, and Kieran felt the warmth of it spread through his chest. But then her eyes lifted, meeting his across the dim office, and the air changed. She looked tired, genuinely tired in a way her armor never allowed during business hours, human, vulnerable, nothing like the untouchable billionaire who'd offered him salvation. "Can I ask you something?" Kieran heard himself say, breaking every rule about boundaries he'd set. Cassia's eyebrow lifted in that way that could mean permission or warning. "Why me? You could have hired anyone with an MBA and 10 years of experience. Why choose someone who was serving your dinner a month ago?" The question hung between them, too honest, too raw. For a moment Kieran thought she'd shut down, retreat behind the professional distance she wore like a second skin. But instead, Cassia closed her laptop. The gesture felt significant, like a door opening. "Because everyone else wants something from me. Connections, status, a line on their resume. You just wanted to survive. That kind of desperation makes people either break or become extraordinary." She stood, moving to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "My father was a janitor at Stanford. He died when I was 12. Everyone looked at me and saw poverty, saw limitations, saw someone who'd amount to nothing. I see that same look in your eyes every morning when you walk in here, like you're waiting for someone to realize you don't belong and kick you out." The confession landed between them like a bridge across an impossible distance. Kieran's throat tightened. He thought of Ava, of Emily, of every moment since his wife died when he'd felt like an imposter in his own life. But before he could respond, before he could acknowledge this fragile moment of connection, footsteps echoed in the hallway. They both straightened instantly, the masks sliding back into place. Gregory Holden appeared in the doorway, his smile sharp as broken glass, his eyes moving between Cassia and Kieran with an assessment that felt like a threat. And Kieran understood with sudden, terrible clarity that someone had been watching them, and that someone was about to make their growing connection a weapon. What happens when the person who saves you becomes the person who makes you vulnerable? The email sat in Gregory Holden's inbox like a loaded gun. Subject line, background check, Kieran Blackwood, confidential. He'd hired the investigator 3 weeks ago. The moment he noticed Cassia's eyes lingering on her new assistant longer than professional courtesy required. Gregory clicked it open at 11 p.m., alone in his corner office. A tumbler of scotch sweating rings into his mahogany desk. The first page detailed Kieran's employment history at Nexus Tech. Promising start, innovative coding work, then the sudden exit when his wife Emily got sick. Nothing damaging there. But page 7 made Gregory smile. The incident happened 5 years ago, buried in legal records most people would never find. Kieran had been desperate, drowning in medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover, watching Emily deteriorate while their savings evaporated. He'd accessed Nexus Tech's client database after his termination, sold contact information to a competitor for $15,000. The deal fell apart before money changed hands, charges were dropped due to Emily's condition, records sealed. But sealed didn't mean gone, and Gregory Holden specialized in finding things people wanted to stay buried. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking, his mind already constructing the narrative. Cassia prided herself on judgment, on seeing potential others missed. But what would it do to her reputation when the board discovered she'd hired a man who'd committed corporate espionage? When clients learned their executive assistant had a history of selling proprietary information? Gregory could see it unfolding. The emergency board meeting, Cassia's face as she realized her charity case had become a liability, the vote of no confidence that would finally give him full control of Dumont Enterprises. But timing mattered. Drop this bomb too early, and Cassia would spin it as ancient history. A desperate man making one mistake years ago. Wait until the connection between them deepened, until Kieran became more than just an assistant, until Cassia's feelings made her vulnerable. Then the revelation wouldn't just damage her professionally, it would destroy her personally. Gregory forwarded the report to his private server, then deleted the email from his inbox. The weapon was loaded. He just needed to wait for the perfect moment to pull the trigger. Across the building, in Cassia's office, Kieran was teaching her to laugh. He'd discovered she found terrible puns hilarious. A crack in her polished armor he exploited shamelessly. "Why don't scientists trust atoms?" he asked, grinning at her over quarterly reports. "Because they make up everything." Her laugh started small, then grew, genuine and unguarded, the sound filling the empty office like light breaking through storm clouds. Neither of them noticed Gregory's silhouette in the darkened hallway, watching through the glass, his smile cold as winter. What happens when your biggest mistake becomes someone else's weapon? The board meeting started normally, quarterly projections, market analysis, the usual corporate theater. Kieran sat outside the conference room, managing Cassia's calendar, responding to emails, existing in the background the way assistants were supposed to. Then Gregory Holden's voice cut through the murmur of discussion, sharp and clear enough to carry through the heavy door. "Before we adjourn, there's a security matter that requires immediate attention. It concerns Ms. Dumont's executive assistant, and a rather troubling pattern of behavior." Kieran's blood turned to ice water. Through the door's frosted glass, he could see shapes shifting, bodies turning toward Gregory. Cassia's silhouette went rigid. Then the door opened, and Gregory stood there, his expression a masterwork of false concern. "Kieran, would you join us? This involves you directly." The walk into that conference room felt like a death march. 12 board members sat around the table, their faces ranging from curious to hostile. Cassia's eyes met his, confusion and something else. Fear flickering in their depths. Gregory tapped his tablet, and the wall screen lit up with documents, legal records, police reports, screenshots of database access logs from 5 years ago. Kieran Blackwood was terminated from Nexus Tech and subsequently attempted to sell proprietary client information to a competitor, Gregory announced, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a prosecutor delivering a killing blow. Charges were dropped, but the incident is documented. "Ms. Dumont, did you know you'd hired someone with a history of corporate espionage when you brought him into the heart of our operations?" The room erupted. Board members demanded explanations. Someone mentioned liability. Another brought up client confidentiality. Kieran stood frozen, watching his life implode in real time. He wanted to explain, to tell them about Emily's hospital bills, about the desperation that made good people make terrible choices, about how the deal never even happened. But his throat had closed, his voice trapped behind the shame that had haunted him for 5 years. Then Cassia stood, and the room fell silent. "Get out." Her words were ice dipped in steel, but Kieran couldn't tell who she meant. Was she dismissing him, ending the dream that had briefly made his life bearable? Or was she talking to Gregory, whose smirk suggested he'd already won? Cassia's hand trembled slightly as she gripped the table edge. "All of you out. This meeting is over." Her eyes found Kieran's across the chaos, and in them he saw the impossible choice she was facing, her company's reputation, or the man who'd made her remember what it felt like to be human. The board members filed out slowly, reluctantly, leaving only Cassia, Kieran, and Gregory in the wreckage of what had been, moments ago, a normal Tuesday morning. When the person who saved you has to choose between you and everything they built, which way does love fall? Cassia waited until the last board member left before she moved. Her heels clicked against the floor as she walked past Kieran without acknowledgement, straight to Gregory, who still wore that poisonous smile like a trophy. "You think you're clever," she said, her voice quiet and deadly. "You think exposing Kieran's past gives you leverage. But you made one critical mistake, Gregory. You assumed I didn't already know." The lie came smooth as silk, protective and fierce. Kieran's chest constricted. She was defending him even though he'd never told her, even though his silence had been a betrayal of its own. Gregory's smile flickered. "You're bluffing. If you knew, you never would have hired him." Cassia pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and Gregory's email correspondence flooded the wall monitor. Messages to competitors, backdoor deals that skirted legal boundaries, communications with board members plotting to oust Cassia and seize control. "I've been watching you for 18 months, Cassia continued, her voice carrying the weight of calculated revenge. "Every shady deal, every attempt to undermine me, every penny you've skimmed from contracts through your shell companies. I have evidence that would send you to federal prison for a decade." The color drained from Gregory's face. Around the table, the documents told a story of systematic corruption, of a man who de-used his position to build a criminal enterprise inside Dumont Enterprises. "You wanted to expose Kieran's one desperate mistake from 5 years ago?" Cassia moved closer, her presence overwhelming. "Fine, but I'll expose 3 years of felonies. Your choice, Gregory. Resign today with a severance package and non-disclosure agreement, or I hand this evidence to the FBI tomorrow morning. You have 30 seconds to decide." Gregory Holden, Yale-educated and ruthlessly ambitious, crumbled like wet paper. He looked at Kieran with hatred so pure it was almost beautiful, then back at Cassia with something closer to fear. "You always were better at this game," he said finally, his voice hollow. "I resign." He walked out with whatever dignity he could salvage, leaving behind an empire he'd tried to steal and 2 people whose connection he'd attempted to weaponize. The door closed, and the silence that followed felt like the aftermath of a storm. Cassia turned to Kieran, and the armor she'd worn during the confrontation cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question wasn't angry. It was hurt, raw, and honest. Kieran's throat worked, words stumbling over themselves. "I was ashamed. I thought if you knew, you'd see me the way everyone else does. Broken, desperate, someone who makes terrible choices when pushed far enough." She crossed the space between them, and for the first time since they'd met, Cassia Dumont reached out and took his hand. "I see someone who loved his wife enough to risk everything. I see someone who's been punishing himself for 5 years for being human. And I see someone I can't imagine my life without." The confession hung in the air between them, terrifying and true, the moment where everything changed forever. When someone fights for you against the whole world, how do you learn to forgive yourself? 6 months later, Kieran stood in Café Voluto watching Ava charm the waitstaff with questions about how the espresso machine worked. His daughter had grown 3 inches, her smile wider now that worry wasn't etched into every corner of their life. She wore a new winter coat, purple, her favorite color, that didn't have duct tape holding the seams together. Cassia sat across from her, listening with genuine interest as Ava explained her science project about water filtration, and Kieran's chest felt too full to contain everything he was feeling. This was the 3rd time Cassia had joined them for dinner, each visit careful and deliberate, both women circling each other like diplomats establishing terms. Ava had been suspicious at first, protective of the small world she and her father had built from ruins. But Cassia didn't try to be a replacement mother. She asked about Ava's interests, listened without condescension, treated her like a person instead of an obstacle. Tonight, watching them laugh over a shared joke about Kieran's terrible singing voice, he saw the walls finally coming down. "Your dad tells me you want to be an engineer," Cassia said, stealing a French fry from Ava's plate. His daughter nodded enthusiastically. I'm going to build water systems for places that don't have clean drinking water. Like what Mama used to talk about before she got sick. The mention of Emily still hurt, but the pain had dulled to an ache Kieran could live with. Cassia's expression softened. Your mother would be proud of you, and I happen to know some engineers at my company who'd love a curious intern next summer. Paid position, of course. Ava's eyes went wide. She looked at Kieran for permission, and he nodded, his throat too tight for words. This was what healing looked like. Not forgetting the past, but building something new alongside it. After dinner, as they walked to the car, Ava slipped her hand into Cassia's, the gesture casual and devastating in its trust. I like her, Dad, she whispered later, when Cassia went to pay the parking meter. She makes you smile the way you used to before Mama died. Is that okay? Kieran knelt down, eye level with his daughter, this fierce little person who'd survived loss and poverty and uncertainty without losing her capacity for hope. It's more than okay, sweetheart. It's exactly what Mama would want for us. To be happy again, to let good people into our lives, to remember that loving someone new doesn't mean forgetting someone we lost. Ava hugged him tight, and over her shoulder, Kieran saw Cassia watching them, her own eyes bright with emotion. The woman who'd left a $0 tip and a note that changed everything was becoming part of their story, and for the first time in years, Kieran believed in happy endings. How do you know when you're ready to let someone new into the spaces grief carved out? The wedding took place at Café Voluto on a Saturday afternoon in spring. Cassia had wanted something small, intimate, a celebration that honored where their story began rather than a spectacle that honored her bank account. Kieran stood at a table near the window, the same table where he'd found her note 8 months ago, wearing a suit that actually fit, his hands steady for the first time in years. Ava served as both flower girl and best woman, her purple dress matching the flowers, her smile bright enough to light the entire room. Rachel from Dumont Enterprises sat in the front row next to the cafe's manager, who'd given Kieran his old job back for one day just so he could serve Cassia one final cup of coffee before they said their vows. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The single dad who'd once been invisible, now standing before the woman who'd seen him when everyone else looked away. The officiant kept it brief, understanding that the real story had been written in late nights at the office, in shared laughter over terrible puns, in the choice to fight for each other when the world tried to tear them apart. I do, Cassia said, and her voice carried none of the corporate steel that had defined her for so long. She was just a woman in a simple white dress, choosing love over isolation, choosing vulnerability over armor. I do, Kieran echoed, and in those 2 words was every thank you, every apology, every promise he'd been too scared to voice. They kissed, and the small crowd erupted in applause, but all Kieran could hear was Ava's delighted laughter, the sound of his daughter embracing this new chapter without reservation. Later, after the cake was cut and the speeches were made, Kieran found Cassia standing at their table, running her fingers over the wood grain where she'd left the note that started everything. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't come back that night? She asked quietly. If I'd just paid the bill normally and walked away? Kieran pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. I'd probably still be here, serving tables and pretending I was fine. But you didn't walk away. You left me something more valuable than any tip. You left me hope. The single dad who once served tables at Café Voluto now stood beside the billionaire who saw his worth, both of them transformed by the unlikely love that bloomed from $0 and infinite possibility. Their story proved that redemption comes in unexpected packages, that second chances sometimes arrive disguised as wealthy strangers with mysterious notes, and that the distance between drowning and salvation is sometimes just the width of a restaurant table. Kieran and Cassia had found each other in the wreckage of their separate loneliness, and together they built something neither could have created alone: a family, a future, and a love that defied every odd stacked against them. You believe in second chances and love that transforms everything? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories that inspire. Share your thoughts in the comments about times when hope arrived unexpectedly, because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.